Today we're taking a look at Walmart again, and we're doing yellow cake mix. On the left we're going to have our bottom shelf, and on the right we'll have our top shelf ingredients with the prices for each item next to them as they're being placed down. We're using Pillsbury in this case because we couldn't actually find a great value cake mix, so we're using them as a stand-in because they were the cheaper cake mix compared between the two, and so we decided to match the fudge as well with the same brand to keep it as consistent as we could. There's the prices between the two, and the biggest cost difference was the eggs. So we're going to compare each ingredient this time around, really zoom in and show you what they look like. We don't really want this to be a cooking show and more of an ingredient comparison show. So starting us off, we got the Betty Crocker cake mix. Just as you expect, it's just got the dry ingredients in here. Nothing too fancy. The packaging was just fine, easy enough to open. Didn't really have any issues with it. Here's the cooking instructions on it. Feel free to pause and take a look at it. It's a pretty basic cake making recipe on the back. There's not really too much to say about the cake mixture. It looks like cake mix. It's flour and some other ingredients like sugar in it. Felt like it, tasted like it. The Betty Crocker was faintly sweet, and it felt like the Pillsbury was a little more sweet, but nothing really major to report on how this felt. The Pillsbury was basically the same as well. This one cost $1 even. Had the exact same baking instructions to it as well. Opening it up, the packaging was just as easy to open as the Betty Crocker, and when you look at it, I wouldn't be able to distinguish between the two if you gave them to me blindfolded. Pouring it in, you can really look closely here. They look very much the same. Color, texture, very identical. The taste though, the Pillsbury had a little bit more of a sweeter note to it. A little more sugar, a little more pronounced flavor there, and the Betty Crocker was slightly a lighter yellow. Moving on to oils. So we used Crisco, pure vegetable oil, as the high-end ingredient. The price difference wasn't very much between these two, and I didn't really want to taste any oil, nor would I know what to do if I drank some oil, if that's even something you can do to taste the difference. So looking at the colors, the only observable thing here, the Crisco is slightly lighter. They're just as oily as the other one, so not much to compare here, unfortunately. Then moving on to the fudge and the rich and creamy chocolate frosting. Starting off with the Pillsbury, it's got that nice processed look to it. When you squeeze it, nothing happens. And then dipping the spoon in, you can see it kind of pulls up almost like marshmallow paste. Really airy, sticky, it just kind of mushes around wherever I put it and sticks to the spoon. Moving over to the Betty Crocker, this one looks a little smoother. It has that same delicious processed feel to it. And when I dip it in with the spoon, you can kind of see there's no air bubbles on it, and it drips right back down in there, a little goopier than the Pillsbury. And the taste between these two was pretty different. The Pillsbury definitely tasted sweeter, and it had a little bit more of an airy texture to it, obviously. And then the Betty Crocker was a little smoother, a little less sweet. Personally, I preferred the Betty Crocker. Moving on to the eggs, we've got our Great Value standard eggs, and then we've got some Handsome brand organic eggs that I'd love to drop on the ground. Biggest difference here is one's brown, the other's white. Not too much of a difference on the outside of them, but these are, again, the handsomest eggs you'll ever buy. Moving to the Great Value ones, I'm gonna crack them open, and this has kind of been consistent with everything we've compared so far. These eggs are a really bright yellow. The whites here look a little cloudy. That might be due to the egg, or might be due to just our fridge almost freezing them. But moving on to the Handsome eggs, you can see again, they're handsome. Opening them up, they have that nice golden yolk to them that the organic eggs tend to have, and little brown speckles in them. But other than that, not too much of a difference. The whites looked basically the same to me, and our fridge would probably be the reason for any cloudiness, almost freezing the eggs, because our fridge runs a bit cold sometimes. And that very scientific jiggle test shows they look the same. Moving on to the cake mix again, pouring in those dry ingredients and then adding the three missing ingredients from it. We've got the water, you've got the oil, and then you got the eggs. The instructions say that you can mix it by hand or with a hand blender. I'm just gonna whisk it this time around, and after about a minute and a half and some help from my wife straightening that box out, we get this consistency. It really is just a nice paste consistency. Every cake mix I've ever made has that same feel to it. Nothing different here. Pouring it in, we've got the 9-inch cake rounds, and we've got some cake strips around it. Basically, you soak them in water and it prevents the edges from cooking faster in the center and gives you a really nice flat cake, as you see here. Those are all of my wife's tips and not mine, so I cannot take any credit for figuring out what those are and inventing them. But it gives us a nice flat cake here with the Pillsbury cake recipe. And it even has a little bit of sponginess to it, and after I play the cake bongos, they're still relatively intact. So we set those back to cool and started mixing up the next ones. Starting off, we got the Betty Crocker, we've got the dry ingredients again, the exact same three ingredients. Water, you've got your oil, and you got your eggs. Again, just whisking it by hand to keep it consistent. After about a minute and a half, really no difference time-wise between these two. Had a nice smooth cake, and it had the same texture to it that the Pillsbury did. Poured them into the 9-inch cake rounds. I kind of botched it here and overfilled the first one. Didn't realize it at the time. Because of my poor baking skills, that first one's a little uneven. And when flipping them onto the cooling rack, I dropped it. And this luckily didn't do too much damage to it. There's a big old hole in it right there, and it did crack down the middle a bit, and it was really ugly. Thank goodness the cake's taste isn't affected by how ugly it is, because it tasted a lot better than how much I had butchered it. Going back to the Pillsbury here, you can see these ones are much more flat, much more uniform, almost look like cornbread when you compare them to the Betty Crocker mix. And we put them on a cake stand with just a little bit of chocolate paste on the bottom to keep it from moving. And I started spreading a nice even layer on top of that one, so we have a nice beautiful cake cross section later. Adding this on, I put it face down again to keep that nice flat top. And I am not a professional cake decorator here, so I didn't even try to make these perfect. I basically just tried to scrape the entire can onto the cake and get it as flat and even as possible. And after scraping out every last bit of frosting I could, I think I did an okay job. The frosting turned out all right, and it looked like any cake you'd buy from a store. Well, except for it looked pretty amateur, but we'll ignore that. Cutting it in half, it cut really easily. I probably should have wiped the knife right here to give it a cleaner cross section, and I neglected to do that, so it's a little smudgy. The cross section looks like a beautiful cake. Looks like this is off of a box. Turned out really well. If I just would have cleaned that dang knife, this would have looked a lot better. But you can see the air bubbles in this are pretty uniform. Almost looks like an actual kitchen sponge. It had a pretty good structure to it. Didn't feel like it was falling apart or anything. Moving on to the Betty Crocker. So we've got this completely just beaten up cake, completely my fault. It's a little more crumbly than the Pillsbury. You can see here, even with the one that was good, it starts to crack in half as I lay it on top. And that was due to most likely me not being super gentle with it. Plus the cake did have a different texture to it. This cake was a lot lighter. The structure to it was a little bit looser than the Pillsbury. You can see my lovely uneven cake here, and cutting into it, cut basically the same, not too much of a difference there. Pulling out the cross section, you see it's not as stable, and it looks like it's a little bit rougher. That was kind of the overall texture difference between the two. The Pillsbury had a really, really tight crumb to it, and when you compare that over to the Betty Crocker, it's a lot airier, a lot looser, and it feels more like a fluffier cake. So diving into the taste test here, started off with the Pillsbury, and it tasted like a yellow chocolate cake. Tasted like it was store-bought, and someone put it together and did a decent job with it. Nothing too special. And I thought this is exactly what the Betty Crocker is gonna taste like. After taking a taste of that Betty Crocker, I was completely wrong. The Betty Crocker was way better. Less sweet, a lot airier, didn't taste as processed. The chocolate was a lot smoother to it, and again, it felt like it wasn't just a bunch of sugar and bread form. So to answer that question that our videos start with, is it better? In this case, yes. Spend a little bit more money, you're gonna get a better product. The Betty Crocker was 24 cents more for the base cake mix, and it tasted so much better. I don't think that the eggs, the oil really changed much to it, so I think you could probably go for the cheaper things there, but the extra 24 cents, in my opinion, made a world of a difference. The frostings were the same price as well, so if you prefer that little more sugary taste, you could probably go with Pillsbury. In my book, I would go for the Betty Crocker every time. So if you like what we're doing, let us know, drop a comment, like the video, subscribe. Let us know what you want to see next. This video is actually based on a comment from one of our earlier videos, so we will absolutely try to fit these in. And thanks for watching.